This past June, the world's biggest battery company walked on stage in Munich and showed off a grid battery storage system with zero lithium. So today I want to talk about CATL, the company that is the king of lithium-ion batteries and why they're suddenly betting against it, and what's inside one of these cells that makes it so cheap, and why this might matter more than any other battery breakthrough we've ever talked about. I'm Ricky, and this is 2-Bit Da Vinci. This video is brought to you by Emergent. In Munich, CATL pulled the covers off of something it calls CATL Sodium, a grid energy storage system, one of those big shipping container-sized box utilities parked next to solar farms to bank electricity. The remarkable part is that it runs entirely on sodium-ion batteries. No lithium at all. And CATL says it's the first sodium grid system proven out in the real world. A single unit holds more than 30 megawatt hours of energy, and it's rated for 15,000 charge cycles, which CATL pegs at around 25 to 30 years of useful service. And it still holds over 90% of its capacity at -20 degrees Celsius. China got their first units this September and the rest of the world next year. And a few weeks earlier, CATL signed a deal to supply 60 gigawatt hours of these sodium-ion batteries to a single company, the largest sodium-ion battery agreement anyone has ever signed. And by itself, about half of all the grid storage batteries CATL shipped in the entirety of 2025. Now, this is the same sodium tech CATL already puts into car batteries that it calls Naxtra, which claims 175 watt hours per kilogram, over 10,000 charge cycles, and 80% charge in 15 minutes, and 90% of its power down to -40 C. So Naxtra is the sodium-ion battery solution for their cars. Tenor is CATL's grid system, and Tenor Sodium is the new sodium version of it. And behind all of it is the idea of a battery that works a lot like lithium in the past, but runs on sodium. Now, none of these specs are the real story, though. The real story is why the biggest battery company on earth is pouring billions into a chemistry it could have built 30 years ago, and it comes down to one idea that has nothing to do with batteries. Take titanium. It's stronger for its weight than aluminum and barely corrodes, yet almost everything around you is made of aluminum instead. Why? Partly because aluminum is about 15 times more common in the Earth's crust, and partly because titanium is a nightmare to refine. Heat it up and it grabs oxygen right out of the air and ruins itself. Aluminum was a precious metal once too, worth more than gold until we cracked cheap electric smelting and it went from crown jewels to soda cans. I bring this up because this is the quintessential argument. If you want renewable energy, wind and solar, you have to have batteries. And if you want batteries, we have to be thinking about a supply chain and abundance on Earth that actually makes sense at that scale. Lithium has been considered a wonder material. It is at the core of all batteries, and it makes rechargeable batteries possible in everything from smartphones to cars. We have seen incredible advancement in the world of batteries over the past couple of decades. And the wonder material that made it all possible is about to hit a wall. Now, we should point out that lithium isn't going anywhere. We'll continue to see lithium batteries as well. Every battery runs on this same idea, a positive and negative electrode, with the electrolyte in between that lets charged particles called ions move across but blocks electrons. Charge it up and the ions pile onto the negative side and tuck into host material, usually always graphite, sliding between its stacked carbon sheets like cards in a deck, a process called intercalation. To get the power back out, you apply a load. The ions slide back out, shoving electrons a long way through your phone or car or whatever else you're trying to power, and that is how the battery works. Lithium is surprisingly good at this. It's the lightest metal there is, so you pack a huge amount of charge into barely any weight, which is why lithium holds around 3 times the energy of our old nickel-cadmium batteries, if you're old enough to remember those, and took energy density from around 80 watt hours per kilogram in 1991 to about 270 today. Researching the CATL story, I fell down a rabbit hole of papers, spec sheets, and PDFs, but not everything makes it into the video. And I've always wanted an easy way to share all the rest of the research with you. So I tried Emergent, today's sponsor, and I just described what I wanted in plain English. A site to host all of our research, sorted by video, free for anyone to read. I called it Research Hub, and I'm blown away because Emergent isn't just one AI, it's a whole team of them working together. They built the database, file storage, and the logins, and I never touched a single line of code. In about 20 minutes, I had the whole site built. Then a code review agent went through my code, found bugs and vulnerabilities, and fixed everything. And a DevOps agent deployed it live to the internet, all in about 30 minutes. And that was from a single prompt. But if you want to fine-tune things, add logos or new features, you can just tell it what you want and keep refining your project. All the code is mine, and I can export it or put it on GitHub anytime. Now, Emergent will host a site for you, like I did, but you can buy a custom domain and have the site live there as well. And here it is, our full research library, live on the internet, ready to help us now and for all videos going forward. Building it isn't the hard part anymore. The idea is, and if you've ever had one and you wish you could build it, now you genuinely can. Try Emergent free at emergent.sh, links in the description, and put a whole dev team behind your next idea today. Huge thanks to Emergent and you. Now back to the show. But there's an issue with lithium. The electrolyte that moves those ions is made of flammable solvent, so your battery is essentially a tiny tank of stuff that could potentially ignite. Ask Samsung, whose Galaxy Note 7 started catching fire in 2016 and cost them around $5 billion and a lot of trust. And cold temperatures make it worse. When it's freezing, lithium plates on the anode as little metal spikes called dendrites that can short the cell out. And even when nothing burns, a freezing EV can lose 20 to 40% of its range. But beyond safety, there's also the question of supply chain. About 3/4 of mined lithium comes from just 3 countries, Australia, Chile, and China. And China alone refines around 65% of it and builds more than 75% of the world's batteries. So the price does what concentrated supply chains always do. Between 2020 and late 2022, lithium went up more than tenfold, then crashed by more than 80%. Try planning a 10-year factory around a metal that trades more like a meme coin. And lithium was never even the scarcest thing in the battery. The painful ingredients live in the positive electrode. The high-performance lithium batteries called NMC lean on nickel, manganese, and cobalt. And cobalt is the real problem here. Around 76% of it comes from one single country, the Democratic Republic of Congo, often under conditions that you would not want around your supply chains. So the industry got clever and built a cheaper battery called LFP, lithium iron phosphate, that drops the cobalt and nickel entirely for cheap common iron and phosphate. It gives up a little energy density, but it's cheaper, safer, and more stable, and it quietly took over. Today, it's roughly half of all EV batteries and the favorite for storage on grids and home battery packs alike. So lithium iron phosphate is the mass volume choice of chemistry, not because it's higher performance or higher energy density, but because of price and affordability with more abundant material. In fact, LFP is a major reason why batteries have gotten so affordable, but there's still a ways to go if we want true ubiquity. But what's interesting and you might not realize is that sodium started this race as the front runner. Back in the 1960s, sodium was the obvious bet. It sits right below lithium on the periodic table, so it behaves almost the same. One of the first serious high-energy rechargeable batteries built by Ford back in 1966 actually ran on sodium. The catch was it had to run at around 300 degrees Celsius, with the sodium inside literally molten, and a battery that doubles as a deep fryer is a tough sell. So the hunt was on for a battery that would work at room temperature, and that prize went to lithium. In the early 1970s, a chemist named Stanley Whittingham showed lithium ions sliding in and out of a material at room temperature. The whole industry pivoted, and by 1991, Sony had the first commercial lithium battery in a camcorder. So why did sodium get left behind? Well, graphite. Lithium ions are tiny and slip right between those carbon sheets. But sodium ions are about a third bigger, and wedging them into graphite is like sliding a hardcover book into a slot built for a magazine. Cheap, perfectly available and attainable graphite was just available, so lithium won and sodium lost. And for decades, that's what we have. That is until the year 2000. In 2000, a group at Dalhousie University in Canada tried a different host, hard carbon. It's a messy, disordered form of carbon you make by baking organic stuff like sugar or plant matter at extreme heat until the atoms freeze into a jumble full of gaps and pores. And all these gaps turned out to be just roomy enough for the bigger sodium ions to fit. So sodium finally had an anode. But a lab result is one thing, a mass manufacturable battery is completely different. And that's why CATL spent nearly a decade and around $1.5 billion. Hard carbon soaks up water straight out of the air, which is the last thing you want in a battery. And CATL says it solved that, plus 3 other manufacturing headaches to build these by the millions. And the reason this goes from science project to actually seriously interesting is because it'll ramp up at the scale of CATL. Its sodium cells are going to be produced on the same production lines that it already uses for lithium. So it's a close to drop-in replacement with no factory upgrades required. So sodium was finally ready, and the only question was which job to give it first, which brings us to the most underrated problem in all of clean energy. Here's something most people never think about. The electricity in your walls is being made right this second. Basically in real time. Natural gas you can stockpile in a pipeline or a tank and burn whenever you want. But raw electricity on the grid doesn't work that way. Generation has to match demand, millisecond by millisecond, to hold the whole system at a steady frequency of 60 cycles per second here in the US, or 50 if you live in Europe or Asia. Let that frequency slip too far and power plants trip offline to protect themselves and the lights go out. And if running a grid wasn't hard enough, we decided to add a bunch of intermittent renewable sources like wind and solar. Solar only produces when the sun's up, flooding the grid at midday and then falling off a cliff at sunset, right as everyone gets home and turns everything on. Wind comes and goes on its own schedule. So the cleaner the grid gets, the worse this mismatch will be. A glut of free energy at noon nobody needs, and a shortage when everyone's at home watching their favorite TV show. There is one fix though. You can catch the cheap midday energy and hold it until people want it, which means storage. Staggering amounts of it. The International Energy Agency figures the world needs total energy storage to reach around 1,500 gigawatts or 1.5 terawatts by 2030, with batteries doing the bulk of that and growing by roughly 14-fold. Storage passing a terawatt hour by 2030 means more than 20 times what we had in 2020. This is one of the biggest build-outs humanity has ever undertaken. The part people miss is that it's easy to just cheer for solar. Lord knows I love solar, but solar is only part of the equation. To actually replace baseload power sources like natural gas, you have to be able to operate 24/7. And if you have big surges and spikes, that means you need a place to sink that extra when you don't need it. So you cannot tell the story of solar and wind as a renewable form of energy generation without also talking about batteries. It's peanut butter and jelly. And here's the beautiful part. For a giant battery sitting in a steel box in a field, almost none of lithium's advantages matter. No one's carrying it, so it doesn't really matter how much it weighs. We will continue to have really high energy density lithium solutions for things like cars because weight will matter there. But for stationary storage, it just doesn't. So while solid-state batteries get a ton of attention, and for good reason, they really offer two key benefits. Much better energy density with new options for anode and cathode, and safety. Now, sodium can already handle safety, and the density doesn't actually matter in big fields where they have plenty of space. This story might be more interesting. So then, what actually is inside a CATL sodium battery? The charge carrier is sodium, the sixth most abundant element in the planet's crust, more than 1,000 times more common than lithium, and it comes straight from salt and soda ash, about as cheap and ordinary as raw materials get. The positive electrode is a layered oxide, and CATL confirms two things about it: no cobalt and no nickel. Going by the chemistry of comparable cells, what's left is mostly sodium, iron, and manganese. Now, manganese gets unfairly lumped in with those rare materials, but it's actually the 12th most common element in the crust, dozens of times more abundant than cobalt. As we mentioned, the negative electrode is hard carbon, which means that you can dodge graphite, which is tightly controlled and largely exported by China. When you make revolutionary breakthroughs, it's really exciting. But then you start to think, how impactful will this be? Imagine a world where steel and iron weren't abundant. We wouldn't have skyscrapers and bridges and all the things that we have. We lucked out that iron, which we then figured out to make steel, was so abundant. It's the same thing here. If we want to make batteries at the kind of scale we need to have a modern, sustainable civilization, we're going to need batteries. And there are just limiting factors that always come up. So lithium iron phosphate has been the reason battery prices have dropped so low. But sodium is another level. Imagine when these batteries get to full scale, how much more affordable they'll be. But like we mentioned, sodium does have some issues as well. But the performance that you give up might not be as big as you think. Naxtra claims about 170 watt hours per kilogram, pretty close to LFP batteries of today. Now that's nowhere near the best NMC, which is around 280 or so, or the best solid state cells that we've tested, like the ones from Prologium, which are around 360 to 400. But one really nice thing is that sodium ion has good cycle life, over 10,000 cycles, which is a charge a day for more than 27 years, and 90% of its power at minus negative 40 C, a temperature that leaves a normal lithium ion battery completely stranded. Now, those are CATL's own lab numbers, so we'll need more independent lab testing. But in the world of batteries, if there's a brand that you could trust numbers from, it's CATL. When we talk about these kinds of breakthroughs, it's really tempting to pit one thing versus the other. But I've said time and time again in our videos, engineering is about a complement of options, a bunch of tools in your toolkit. Sodium is not going to replace lithium everywhere. It's a bit heavier and holds a bit less energy for its size. So for anything that you need energy density and weight, your phone, your laptop, EVs, electric planes, lithium will be the king. What sodium is coming for is LFP, the cheap, high volume, doesn't need to be the lightest possible tier of storage for things like grid storage, home batteries, and so much more. What about price? Well, here's the thing. When lithium prices crashed, it dragged LFP pricing down with it. So right now, sodium isn't actually that much cheaper than LFP. They're running neck and neck. But these are temporary trends. These prices are going to fluctuate like all commodities. But you can't deny that sodium will always be cheaper. It's just a raw material that is way more abundant. Whenever you put a lot of strain on one element, right? We need helium for semiconductors, we need lithium for batteries. These price fluctuations and wildly unpredictable markets are always going to happen. And that's another reason why sodium is going to be so important. It will bring stability to people who are trying to plan for 10 and 20 years and not have a clue what to expect. So back to where it all started. Why is the world's biggest battery company betting on the oldest, least glamorous chemistry in the room? Well, because they worked out the things that kept this technology in the lab. For 30 years, we judged batteries by one number, energy density, and got really good at making it bigger. But the planet's real need is a battery that we can build by the billions out of stuff we can never run out of, or almost never run out of, to soak up all that clean energy that we're about to make. And you cannot build billions of anything if 76% of it comes from just one country. I've been doing this for 10 years now. If you look back at our old videos, we've covered everything. I mean, we've covered batteries, we've covered all these topics in such detail. Whenever we break away from the pure engineering and batteries and cover a supply chain thing, it's because what I've learned doing this is it's more than just the engineering. There is the supply chain. And the supply chain is something that we're all suddenly masters and experts about since the pandemic, seemingly, but it matters. And even in my own house, I've learned that solar alone just won't cut it, because for us, the solar panel production is around 6 or 7 hours a day. But if you can make a bunch of it and store it in your batteries, you can be completely off grid. Something that we're going to cover in a future video. So if you've made it this far, please consider subscribing. Only about 1/3 of you are actually subscribed, and we have a ton of amazing content planned, so you don't want to miss out on any of that. And what do you think? How big of a deal is sodium ion? And the CATL announcement in particular? Sound off in the comments below. All right, I'm Ricky with Vinci. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.